Think of two artificial intelligence models that start to fail in production. The first model responds to the stress by adjusting its core mechanics, rewiring its internal nodes to restore accuracy. The second model freezes its core, but immediately spins up a new user dashboard, a stack of safety warnings, and an ethics committee. When a system is challenged, does it become more accurate or merely more elaborate? In 1974, physicist Richard Feynman warned against cargo cult science. He described practices that mimic the visible forms of scientific investigation, the offices, the terminology, the datasets, without possessing the underlying mechanisms that actually make the results valid. Today, that pattern has scaled upward into what researcher J.D. Duran calls an AI cargo cult. This is a socio-technical system that persistently reproduces the visible forms of rigorous AI work, the benchmarks, the safety boards, the architecture diagrams, while lacking or actively avoiding the mechanisms that make those forms truth-tracking. The presence of standard evaluations and safety committees does not guarantee a reliable AI system. Often, they simply provide the sophisticated illusion of one. To be clear, we are not talking about early-stage speculative research. Honest negative results or isolated instances of weak code are normal parts of engineering. The pathology requires two specific elements to take root: the visible imitation of rigor, like complex interpretability diagrams or governance boards, combined directly with missing, weak, or simulated reliability mechanisms. The defining feature is persistence. For a system to qualify as a cargo cult, the behavior has to continue even after developers identified the glaring gap between the visible form and the actual mechanism. These systems persist because the forms themselves are institutionally rewarded. A lab or startup can easily secure funding, status, and publications by producing standard metrics and polished dashboards, regardless of their operational truth. AI cargo cults represent the institutionalization of weakness, a system of highly rewarded, ritualized forms that actively resist correction. The collapse begins with representation debt, the accumulated gap between the technical precision a framework claims to have and the operational grounding it actually delivers. This debt escalates through 5 predictable levels. Level 1 is the unrepaid term. A single technical word, like alignment or resonance, gets tossed around broadly without a strict operational definition. At level 2, multiple ungrounded terms accumulate. You now have an unrepaid framework whose claims drastically exceed its substantiation. Level 3 introduces unrepaid methodology. Complex agent architectures and standardized evaluations are adopted, but they carry no real falsification power. This breaches the institutional level at step 4. Labs and startups actively develop internal incentives that reward the appearance of rigor over substance. Finally, level 5. The entire ecosystem responds to failure by adding more complexity. You have a full cargo cult system. Systemic failure in AI deployment is not instantaneous. It is the compounding interest of unpaid representation debt left unchecked by leadership. The engine that transforms local technical debt into systemic cargo cult behavior is called ritual substitution. In healthy engineering practice, external forms, like a benchmark score or a safety statement, serve as imperfect but useful indicators of underlying causal mechanisms. Ritual substitution occurs the exact moment that external signal completely detaches from the underlying mechanism. The organization keeps producing the form, but purely for social or institutional signaling. For instance, a benchmark score stops estimating transferable capability and instead becomes the sole optimization target. Complex interpretability visualizations replace actual causal understanding of the model's behavior, and the mere existence of an ethics governance board completely replaces actual enforceable accountability. Once detached, the system experiences zero corrective pressure when the core mechanism fails. It only experiences pressure to produce more of the ritual signal. Ritual substitution turns diagnostic tools into self-reinforcing status rituals, making the system look rigorous even as it hollows out from the inside. We can use these typologies not to assign moral blame, but as diagnostic tools to evaluate real engineering teams right now. Look at the agent cargo cult. Elaborate role assignments and orchestration diagrams proliferate, while verifiable memory integrity and coordination guarantees are completely ignored. In the interpretability cargo cult, generating circuit language and mechanistic jargon is rewarded independently of whether it actually enables falsifiable claims about the model. Or the product cargo cult, where highly polished UI dashboards simulate control, but true reliability engineering, real-time monitoring, and deployment rollback capacity are absent. Across all these typologies, the industry is making a fatal error, confusing the high-fidelity rendering of a dashboard or a diagram with actual operational control. If these socio-technical systems are hollow, how do they manage to survive external scrutiny, red teaming, and constant criticism without immediately collapsing? They survive through a defense mechanism called cargo cult resilience, the tendency to respond to criticism by elaborating visible forms of rigor rather than strengthening reliability. True robust systems preserve their core function under stress. Cargo cult systems preserve their legitimacy. When critics point out a gap in safety or performance, the system reflexively generates new visible artifacts to signal responsiveness, creating a dense shield of process. These additions create the superficial appearance of progress. In practice, they function as defensive layers that require zero changes to the underlying mechanisms. Over time, this behavior continuously raises the cost of further criticism. It shifts the evaluative attention away from how the mechanism actually works and toward the sheer quantity of the forms being produced. In a resilient cargo cult, transparency and added process are not solutions. They are the bureaucratic camouflage used to avoid actual engineering accountability. Why do highly intelligent researchers, investors, and engineers allow this decoupling of form and mechanism to persist? Market speed and hype cycles disproportionately reward highly visible, fast forms, like leaderboards and flashy demos, over slow, less legible mechanism building. Once a lab, startup, or community invests heavily in a ritualized metric, correcting it becomes politically and financially costly. As author Nassim Nicholas Taleb outlines in his concept of skin in the game, a system is inherently dangerous when its creators suffer no real-world consequences when their operational foundations fail in deployment. These systems represent the rational output of a commercial ecosystem that prioritizes dashboard theater over patient engineering. Deculting an AI system involves forcibly retethering existing benchmarks, diagrams, and governance structures back to reality. This requires mechanism audits, systematically verifying whether claimed forms map to physical variables and actual deployment rollback capacity. We must establish explicit pre-committed falsifiers, enforceable conditions under which a claim, benchmark, or process must be abandoned before testing even begins. Toothless internal red teaming must be replaced with independent adversarial testing that possesses real external power to halt deployment. The industry needs a cultural shift in how maturity levels are positioned. Research communities must actively change what they reward to directly address representation debt. The final, unforgiving rule of AI development remains: sustainable progress requires socio-technical systems that become more accurate when challenged, not merely more elaborate. If the forms of rigor remain disconnected from the physical mechanisms of reliability, the appearance of progress is an illusion, and eventually the planes will not land.